Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another video and today's topic is this. Why didn't God just wipe them out himself? Today's video is actually from a comment that I received on another video, and it's a straightforward question, and I've got to say that it is a good question. And actually this commenter left another question that we're going to be tackling today. Before I even start this, though, I just wanted to tell you that I am certainly no expert in this. I am going to share with you my opinion about these things, but I am in no way saying that I am 100% correct on this. So I know that if you have another point of view, you will let me know in the comments. And honestly, I learn a lot from people in the comments. I learn more from people who are gracious in their comments, not so much in the spammy, slanderous ones. So if you want me to listen to you, be kind, and that's the way that you should be anyway as a believer. But anyway, let's just read this comment. So Derek S4531. I'm really confused about some of this. I don't see why Satan should have been allowed to corrupt others to destroy Jerusalem, when God technically could have done it himself instantly. I'm also struggling with the moral implications of such actions, but who am I to judge? Another thing I don't fully understand is who Satan is. Who is Lucifer? And is Satan supposed to be more than one single entity? I'm going to focus on this first set of questions. And so the part that I believe that Derek is really confused about, and I'm sure that some of you are too, is why Satan should have been allowed to corrupt the others. And we're talking about Revelation 20, when Satan was released and he set out to deceive the nations at the four corners of the earth, or the four quarters of the earth. And they then began their war on first the believers and then ultimately on Jerusalem, because the book of Revelation was about the judgment of old covenant Israel. In the end, that's really what it was about. But the question is, why was Satan allowed to corrupt others and get them to destroy Jerusalem? God could have done it. Yes, God absolutely could have done it. I think that what we need to understand, though, is that the people that were corrupted in order to attack, they were already living by the flesh. They had already rejected the Messiah. And these were people who were being judged. And Satan was being used in their own judgment. So yes, so while and a lot of people, and I know that I focused more on like the Romans versus the Jews, but in really the Zealots in Jerusalem did a great deal of damage in their own city. And so there were these two factions of Jews in Jerusalem. They were actually the ones who did the most damage in Jerusalem, even more so than Rome did. And so again, I think that this is a matter of judgment. And we see other instances of that in the Old Testament. So if we read 2 Chronicles 18 verses 20 to 22, it says, Then a spirit came forward, stood before the Lord, and said, I will entice him. By what means? Asked the Lord. And he replied, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouths of all his prophets. You will surely entice him and prevail, said the Lord. Go and do it. So you see, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouths of these prophets of yours, and the Lord has pronounced disaster against you. So here, the Lord is allowing a spirit to go and entice people, to place a lying spirit in the mouths of the prophets. This is a judgment for disobedience. Just as I believe Satan being allowed to deceive what I believe is apostate Israel in many cases, the Zealots and the Jews at that time, they were being deceived by Satan, and they were being used in judgment against their own city and their own temple, actually. So 1 Kings 22:22. And he replied, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouths of all his prophets. You will surely entice him and prevail, said the Lord. Go and do it. So very similar. It's probably the same instance. I should probably have looked into this more, but I did not, and I'm just admitting that to you right now. Ezekiel 14:9. But if the prophet is enticed to speak a message, then it was I, the Lord, who enticed him. And I will stretch out my hand against him and destroy him from among my people, Israel. So then down here, Jeremiah 4:10. Then I said, Ah, Lord God, how completely you have deceived this people and Jerusalem by saying, you will have peace while a sword is at our throats. So, and again, Isaiah 19:14. The Lord has poured into her a spirit of confusion. Egypt has been led astray in all she does as a drunkard staggers through his own vomit. So again, this is something that happens in judgment. And so the judgment on Jerusalem is certainly far from being the only time that this happens, that people are deceived into doing things. So, and then we come down to, okay, but God could have wiped out Jerusalem himself. Yes. However, God also, there are so many instances of God using nations to judge other nations. I just found a quick summary while I was looking into this, and this is on Bible Hub, God's use of nations for judgment. Through the biblical narrative, God demonstrates his sovereignty over the nations, often using them as instruments of judgment against his people and others. This theme is prevalent in both the Old and New Testaments, illustrating God's control over history and his commitment to justice. Remember, I said he is a just God, and righteousness. And some examples of this, I will leave a link in the description if you wanted to go through and read all of these, but I'm just going to read the nations themselves. So the first is Assyria and Israel. Then we have Babylon and Judah, Persia and Babylon. Then there's the New Testament perspective. In the New Testament, the theme of God using nations for his purposes continues, albeit with a broader, more spiritual focus. The Roman Empire, for instance, plays a significant role in the context of the New Testament. While not explicitly described as an instrument of judgment in the same way as Assyria or Babylon, the Roman occupation sets the stage for the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan through Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul acknowledges God's sovereignty over earthly authorities. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which is from God. The authorities that exist have been appointed by God. And then there are the theological implications. The use of nations as instruments of judgment underscores several key theological principles. Divine sovereignty. God's control over the rise and fall of nations affirms his ultimate sovereignty over history. He orchestrates events according to his divine will and purpose. Justice and righteousness. God's use of nations for judgment highlights his commitment to justice. He holds nations accountable for their actions, using other nations as agents of his judgment. And I'm just going to throw in there that there are many times that the nations that were used to judge other nations, very often down the line, they end up being judged themselves. Covenant faithfulness. And when they end up being judged themselves, it is for their own disobedience. Okay, I just had to add that in there. Covenant faithfulness. For Israel, the use of foreign nations as instruments of judgment, think Rome, Jerusalem. The use of foreign nations as instruments of judgment serves as a reminder of the covenant relationship with God. Their disobedience leads to consequences. Yet God's promises of restoration and redemption remain steadfast. Hope and restoration. Even in judgment, God's ultimate purpose is redemptive. The use of nations to discipline his people often precedes a promise of restoration and hope, as seen in the return from exile and the coming of the Messiah. And I've got to say, and also, let's not forget the restoration and hope that happened when the new heaven and earth came in, when the new covenant was ushered in at the destruction of the temple. Talk about hope and restoration. Okay, another one. Another thing I don't fully understand is who Satan is. Who is Lucifer? And is Satan supposed to be more than one single entity? Well, I'll talk more about Satan first, and I'll get to Lucifer later, because honestly, I don't know as much about Lucifer. I do know that I do not believe that the Bible says anywhere that Lucifer is Satan. So I will throw that out there. But okay, let's look into this again. I don't fully understand who Satan is, and is it Satan supposed to be more than one single entity? I believe that the answer to that is yes. Satan is definitely more than one single entity, and I will show you some examples of that. Okay, first we'll go to Job chapter 1 and we'll read verses 6 to 8. One day the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. "Where have you come from?" said the Lord to Satan. "From roaming through the earth," he replied, "and walking back and forth in it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one on earth like him, a man who is blameless and upright, who fears God and shuns evil." So here we have an entity being referred to as Satan. And I've got to say that Satan, as far as I understand, is not a proper noun. It is more of what in English we would call a common noun. And so first of all, let's go to what the definition of Satan even is. I believe it's actually pronounced Satan. It means adversary. It means accuser. It can mean opponent. So many times when you see the word Satan in the Bible, that is actually the translation that is used, but it is actually meaning like an adversary or an accuser. So if you continue on in reading about Job, you will see that Satan, or the Satan, and the one that many people say that we should look at Satan when it comes to this context as a prosecuting attorney. Okay, he was given permission by God to do that he was allowed to do certain things to Job, but he was bound from killing Job. Okay, so that's important. That's, you see a binding that prevents him from doing a certain thing, but he is still allowed to do other things to Job. For example, he loses his family. He basically destroys his life. But so we have the Satan in this narrative, in this account, again, more like a prosecuting attorney. Okay. Then if we go to Matthew, and this is so not exhaustive, but I just wanted to give you some clear examples of Satan not being the same entity. Matthew 16, and we will read 22 to 23. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Far be it from you, Lord," he said. "This shall never happen to you." But Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." So in this instance, Jesus called Peter Satan. And when he called Peter Satan, I believe that he was calling him that more as an adversary, not as some devil with red horns and, hoofs for feet and like a pointy tail. He was using this word as an adversary because Peter was telling him, no, these things are not going to happen to you. So here we have another example of Peter being called a Satan. When it comes to Satan in a large portion of the New Testament, I have a very different look on Satan, or a different perspective on Satan than most people. And I'm going to share with you some verses so that you can understand why. If we go back to the definition of the word Satan, remember we had adversary, and we had the word opponent, and we also have the word accuser. And if you read through the New Testament, you will see that there are many, many, many accusations brought against both Jesus and the Christians in the apostolic age. So here's one example, John 19:6. "So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, 'Crucify, crucify!' Pilate said to them, 'Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him.'" So I want you to ask yourself, who is doing the accusing in this verse? Next, if we go down to Matthew 27, verses 12 to 14. "And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, He did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he did not answer him with regard to even a single charge, so the governor was quite amazed. So again, if we look here, who is accusing Jesus? We see here that it is not Pilate. We also saw in the last verse that it was not Pilate. Who is doing the accusing? John 10, verses 32 and 33. But Jesus responded, "I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of these do you stone me?" "We are not stoning you for any good work," said the Jews, "but for blasphemy, because you, who are a man, declare yourself to be God." So again, who is accusing him? In John 5:18, because of this, the Jews tried all the harder to kill him. Certainly sounds like an opponent. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own father, making himself equal with God. I also found a nice little summary of the persecution of early Christians on Bible Hub. Bible Hub is like good for so many things, not even just translations. It has so many good summaries. I don't obviously I don't 100% agree with every single one of them, but it is a very, very good resource to have on hand. So it says the persecution of early Christians is a significant theme in the history of the early church, reflecting the trials and tribulations faced by the followers of Jesus Christ as they sought to spread the gospel in a predominantly hostile environment. I wonder who was making it hostile. This persecution is documented both in the New Testament and in historical records from the first few centuries AD. The New Testament provides several accounts of persecution faced by the early Christians. In the book of Acts, the apostles and early believers frequently encountered opposition from Jewish religious leaders and Roman authorities. Acts 4:1-3 describes the arrest of Peter and John. While they were speaking to the people, the priests, the captain of the temple guard, and the Sadducees came up to them, greatly disturbed that they were teaching the people and proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection of the dead. They seized Peter and John, and because it was evening, they put them in custody until the next day. Stephen, one of the first deacons, became the first Christian martyr as recorded in Acts 7. His bold proclamation of the gospel led to his stoning, as described in Acts 7:59-60. While they were stoning him, Stephen appealed, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Falling on his knees, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." And when he had said this, he fell asleep. That passage that I just shared with you, it did not show us who was doing the stoning. So if we go back a little bit further in the chapter of Acts 7, it says, on hearing this, the members of the Sanhedrin were enraged, and they gnashed their teeth at him. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked intently into heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. So I'm going to ask you again, who was doing the persecuting? Who was doing the accusing? The Apostle Paul, formerly a persecutor of Christians himself, experienced significant persecution after his conversion. In 2 Corinthians 11:24-25, Paul recounts his sufferings. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. The persecution of Christians intensified under various Roman emperors. Nero, who ruled from AD 54 to 68, is infamous for his brutal treatment of Christians, whom he blamed for the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64. Tacitus, a Roman historian, records that Christians were subjected to extreme tortures, including being torn by dogs, crucified, or burned alive. Subsequent emperors, such as Domitian and Diocletian, also enacted policies that led to widespread persecution. Christians were often accused of atheism due to their refusal to worship Roman gods and the emperor, leading to their marginalization and punishment. So here we see that it is also the Roman emperors who were at fault partially at fault. I'm going to say they did not do the majority of it, but they certainly had a hand in it. And I believe that this is why God also used Rome in judgment, because Rome certainly, they ended up losing a lot when it came to this. And if we see, Rome did fall. It was a few hundred years later. Rome eventually did get judged. In Revelation 12:10, it says, "And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, 'Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God.'" So I'm sure you have a clue about who I think Satan might have been in much of the New Testament. I believe that it certainly is tied to the old covenant. And the old covenant was indeed thrown down, wasn't it? And it was that old covenant who was a constant accuser, because it was the old covenant who brought to light the sin that people were doing. In Revelation 2, we'll just read verses we'll just read verse 9. I always link all these verses in the description, so this whole thing will be there if you want to read it, but I'm just going to read verse 9. "I know your affliction and your poverty, though you are rich, and I am aware of the slander of those who falsely claim to be Jews, but are in fact a synagogue of Satan." So, in my opinion, a synagogue of Satan is the old covenant. And those who falsely claim to be Jews, in my opinion, are apostate Israel. Because in my opinion, at this point, the spiritual Israel has now, taken its stand, and that is what this is referring to. You might disagree with me. That's fine. This isn't something that I'm going to say I am 100% certain that this is the case. And I also would not even, I could even say there may very well be some sort of spiritual entity behind this, but at this point in time, I I do believe that Satan is tied to the old covenant, to old covenant Israel. As for the last question, who is Lucifer? That is something, honestly, that I have not ever spent a whole lot of time on. As I mentioned earlier, I have seen that Lucifer is never referred to as Satan in the Bible. And from what I understand, the word it's Lucifer, but it actually means light bringer, I believe, or light bearer. But let's see what Got Questions has to say. Got Questions, honestly, they're very dispensational in the way that they look at things, but this was really the only thing that I could find for now on this particular topic. So, and I did agree with this, because I have seen it says that Lucifer is another name for Satan, and that's the name that was used in Paradise Lost, and that's actually where people come up with Lucifer as being Satan, is from Paradise Lost and from Christian tradition. It's not from the Bible. Not saying that he can't be a Satan, but not I don't even know that I would say that there is one particular the Satan. Again, this is something that I'm not really too sure about at this time. That's where I'm at right now, though. In common usage, Lucifer is another name for Satan. Famously, John Milton used this name for Satan in Paradise Lost. There is no verse in the Bible that says Lucifer is Satan. In fact, there is some dispute as to whether Lucifer is even a proper name in the Bible. A character referred to as Lucifer appears in Isaiah 14. The setting is a taunt against the king of Babylon. The wicked king who oppressed other nations is brought to ruin. God has brought the king of Babylon's scepter and laid him low. The defeated king of Babylon is pictured as entering the place of the dead, where other departed kings await him with glee. And then it goes on. Do I want to read this? Sure. I just don't know how long I want to keep you. Ha! Well, you could always turn me off if I'm taking too long. "You also have become weak as we are. You have become like us. All your pomp has been brought down to the grave, along with the noise of your harps. Maggots are spread out beneath you, and worms cover you." Isaiah 14:10-11. The prophecy against the king of Babylon continues with this interesting passage. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning! How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations! For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. The King James Version and the New King James Version have Lucifer in Isaiah 14:12, but other translations have morning star, day star, or shining star, or shining one. See, and like I said, I heard something like light bringer. Is the term meant as a proper name or simply as a metaphor for the king's greatness? Scholars are divided on the issue. Clearly, the primary interpretation of Isaiah 14 is that of a prophecy against the human king of Babylon. However, the poetic descriptions of his grandeur, his sin, and his fate are so extravagant as to cause many scholars to consider a secondary interpretation, a reference to Satan. I just want to point out here that on this very dispensational site that they are actually acknowledging that the prophecies have poetic descriptions. It says it right here. So glad that they at least understand that sometimes. Anyway, we note that the following things are true about the king in Isaiah 14. He falls from heaven. He is cast down to the earth. He had destroyed nations. He sought to ascend to God's throne. He desired to be like the Most High. He is relegated to the lowest part of the pit. In a clear reference to Satan, Jesus uses some similar wording in Luke 10:18. I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. The link between Satan and Lucifer seems to be supported by Satan's fall from heaven mentioned by Jesus. Satan's temptation of Eve that suggested she could be like God, Satan's work as a destroyer, and Satan's masquerading as an angel of light. We believe the best way to look at Isaiah 14 is as a dual condemnation. The human king of Babylon and the spiritual force behind him are both facing judgment for their pride and wickedness. And so that's similar to what I said when it comes to Old Covenant Israel. There may have also been a spiritual force behind Old Covenant Israel. That's something that I think is certainly possible. The human king had occupied a glorious throne in this world. He was a star among rulers, and the spiritual entity had occupied a glorious position in the heavenlies, a true Lucifer or star of the morning. So that was pretty interesting, especially I think the most interesting part for me was just them acknowledging that there's poetic language in the prophecies. But that's just me. That's exactly where I go with my mind for everything. So I hope that these answered your questions, but that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. And if you like my work and would like to become a channel member, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.